Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, we'll talk retail IT industry trends with Gilbert Bailey, the president of Genius Retail and Small Business for Global Payments. Gilbert has been part of the Global Payments team for nearly 10 years. Prior to that, he was a managing member of customer engagement platform provider Beanstalk Data, which was acquired by Heartland back in 2016. He began his career in 1991 as an account executive at VAR's Software Express, where he was promoted several times during his 8.5 years tenure, including serving as the company's VP of Sales and IT. Gilbert, welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Great to be here, Jim.
Yeah, pleasure to talk with you. So glad to have you part of the RSPA community. So let's start with your background so our listeners and viewers can get to know you a little bit better. So as I mentioned, your first job in the industry, 1991 with a startup VAR. Can you tell us a little bit more about that company, your roles there, and then what you learned as a reseller that I'm sure is still carried forward with you today?
Yeah, great. Happy to talk about Software Express as an important part of my career and learning. So yeah, in 1991, I started there fresh out of college at the ripe age of 21. And there were four folks at this startup, and I'll get into sort of a little bit of a background there. So Software Express was actually founded in 1984 and was a retail establishment where folks could walk in and buy software in Charlotte, North Carolina. And they'd opened a couple locations. And by 1991, they realized they were about to be impacted by something they called the Blockbuster effect, which is Blockbuster, you probably remember, went out and educated everybody on rental of videos. Like all these little mom and pops did that, educated everybody, and then Blockbuster came to town and just sort of took the market from everybody that actually built it. So in order to head that off, they did a pivot in 1991 and started a little sort of spin-off startup to go after the education and public sector vertical with a little company named Microsoft. Microsoft at that point was thinking about Bill Gates, how to sort of get out of operating systems and get into applications and network operating systems. And so they came up with the idea that if they went into academia, where people were still using, if you remember, typewriters and film strip projectors in K through 12 and DECVAX, mainframes and minis in higher ed, they could create a de facto standard. They thought that if they could sell, it would generate 8 licenses for every one they sold once those folks graduated, the kids and whatnot. So anyway, there's a couple things I learned there. So we started in 91. There were 4 of us in this startup. So I watched the legacy business wind down, which was an interesting thing. So being in the growth area, they were investing in the 4 folks as we started to grow nationally. They were investing in that while we watched them shut down the retail, sort of establishment and stores. So that was an interesting theme that's continued in my life. Being in the growth area is then you're where they say you're skating to where the puck's going to be, and that's where the investment and capital allocation is going. And then you're watching sort of these legacy businesses sort of get repurposed and whatnot and sort of recycled, if that makes sense. So fast forward, we went from 4 folks, no sales, sitting at a desk selling software with a phone and 3x5 index cards, and you literally fax or mail product spec sheets on Microsoft products, to we were on Inc. 500 twice, and we became one of the largest resellers for Microsoft in North America in that space. So, at one point I got to, be at events be invited to speak with Ballmer, with CIOs of universities and colleges. And there's a couple of things I learned in that. So the first is 91, there was a recession. So people who weren't around, there was a recession in 91. So we were cold calling into academia. So cold calling K through 12 schools, cold calling universities and so forth. And they had freezes on spending money. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The other thing I learned is that Microsoft, when they were then battling with how to gain mind share and so forth, they decided on an indirect model. And that really stuck out to me because Software Express historically had sold things. They'd been there from the ground floor. So they sold, Borland, people that remember these names, WordStar, Borland, WordPerfect, Lotus. I could go down a list of names. If you've been around for a while in the software space, you'll remember those. Microsoft went through an indirect model where to get scale, they partnered with VARs and they would not sell and compete against us direct. So, I personally went and sold the first contract at Penn State and the Mid-Atlantic and the Rutgers University system and so forth. And I didn't have to worry about Microsoft, some enterprise team competing with me. I was there educating them on why they wanted personal computers. That's another thing. I had to learn how to not
Right.
just sell. We weren't selling commodities. We weren't selling commoditized software. We were educating people on why did they want personal computers? Why did they want software? And then also pricing them and negotiating agreements on behalf of Microsoft, if that makes sense. So I learned that indirect model is really one of the keys to Microsoft quickly getting scale in the early 90s. So.
Interesting. So it seems like, well, first I have to give props. I love that you had the 3x5 cards. I started my own business in 1993. I still have, I'm pointing over here for those not watching on YouTube to a cardboard box that I have. I still have that card deck.
I still have my original database in a fireproof safe that has my original 3x5 cards with all the notes of where I was calling, community colleges and K through 12 and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I can't get rid of it. And that's the whole thing, like the lessons learned. It seems like a big lesson that you learned was the value of the indirect model, and then also that resellers need to pivot. Am I understanding that correctly? Like you can't, no matter how good it's going now, you've always got to make sure you're turning and adapting for the future. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right. And we'll come back to that later, thinking about leadership styles and so forth. But yes, you got to be able to pivot. And another thing I learned in that was, not only did Microsoft focus on the indirect channel, but they also did things that were unique. As a VAR, we got on the ground floor with Microsoft. We then scaled with Microsoft. But obviously, as a VAR, we resold other things. But one of the things that Microsoft also did was, as an example, I learned when they did incentive programs or SPIF programs, they made sure that the SPIF programs were set up in such a way that the sales folks got SPIFs, not that there was some extra MDF funds or funds that flowed through to the reseller at the top level, and the sales folks never saw it. So they got mind share. As I was building the inside sales team, we were 4, and then ultimately I ran the inside sales team. Microsoft was a great partner in that they really got the mind share of our sales team because they were getting the SPIFs directly to them and then flying in and educating them on that, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Very much. Very much. Okay. So can you talk now about your path from Software Express to today? You mentioned earlier Beanstalk, data, global, but there's some other things along the way. Share with us that as well.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So, one of the lessons I personally learned at Software Express was, while I had great success and, it scaled up, I didn't have equity. So in 2000, I decided to leave, and I left about 90 days before the .com bubble burst. So it was a good time to sort of transition and pivot, just, in hindsight. And then I had 2 sort of lifestyle startups. I had a software business that I built a software platform, but it's more of a lifestyle business, just me. And then I also had a fencing equipment company where I imported and distributed fencing equipment with the first omni-channel platform for online and then in-person sale purchases of fencing equipment for the Olympic sport of fencing.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you. For people think like fencing goods. You're actually talking about the parrying and everything like that.
Yeah. With the success at Software Express, I made a list of things I always wanted to do. Fencing was on that list, and I started late in life. And so, I was able to live vicariously through some sponsorships I did, and also having that fencing company along with this sort of this other software business I had that was more of a lifestyle business. But one of the things to connect the dots to Beanstalk data. So there at Software Express, back to your point about VARs pivoting. There was an entrepreneur club in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm from or based, and it was called the Metrolina Business Council. And it was small entrepreneurs. And at Software Express, as I was helping the owners lead Software Express, they were members of this Metrolina Business Council. And so I would go attend while I was at Software Express. And I met another person who owned what was the first self-service copy stores in Charlotte. And they were called I think it was called Quick Corners. And just as Software Express was thinking about the blockbuster effect to software, he noticed that Kinko's, this is before FedEx Kinko's might come to town and destroy his businesses. So he pivoted into commercial printing. And so we worked very closely with him at Software Express as we scaled in terms of big, if you remember the old days of big catalogs and 800 numbers and that type of thing. And then we also helped him with technology in his business with desktop publishing and networking and servers and whatnot. And so fast forward around 2009, And this will get back to what I mentioned about the recession. So in 91, a lesson I learned was when I was cold calling from 91 to 93 with all those 3x5 index cards and no one was purchasing, when the economy turned, because I had the relationships, we had been doing all that hard work, and we had educated people on personal computers and Microsoft software, we just scaled up, and it was just an unbelievable hockey stick from 93 to 2000. So in 2007, 8, as the Great Recession hit, and I was starting to learn as a lifestyle software business, you can only scale so far. I started thinking this recession is so much deeper, the Great Recession. I need to look for something where I can get with a team of folks and get into some new, again, skating to where the puck's going. And when we come out of this recession, it'll be an even bigger hockey stick. And so it just so happened that the gentleman that I mentioned who had the copy stores, he was funding a startup called Beanstalk Data. And so they connected with me and asked me if I had any interest, met with them, and then we started that in 2009 and then off to the races.
How about that? It's funny how points of your career, like you started off with the recession, you left somewhere right before the dot-com bubble, and then you're taking advantage of it. Times where people might want to curl up and crawl under their desk, you're taking advantage of it, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Correct.
Always looking for opportunities.
Yep. Always looking for opportunities. And then at Beanstalk, we went through multiple cycles, which was, folks will probably forget that, at one time there were not such a thing as a smartphone. So about the time that Beanstalk started up, the BlackBerries is probably the best out there, and it's really just for email messaging. So at Beanstalk, we started as a marketing automation cloud. We pivoted a couple times there between powering academia. So because of Software Express and being in academia, Beanstalk first started to power marketing automation in academia. Pretty quickly, we realized for a variety of reasons that wasn't going to work. And in 2010, we partnered up with Expient Solutions, Expient Iris point of sale, which was the largest, first Windows-based point of sale and largest in the quick service restaurant space, and then integrated our marketing automation cloud there, and then kind of off to the races. And then we watched as things like smartphones came along and the iPhone was introduced and apps. And then, how was our environment going to work with not just point of sale, but with mobile? And then as mobile came along, then you had a lot of these early mobile wallet providers where they first introduced the wallet, and then they realized they need value in the wallet to get consumers to adopt it. And hence we started to triangulate Beanstalk with many of the early payment wallets to add loyalty and other, customer engagement feature functionality with point of sale, if that makes sense. So we kind of went through those cycles as well.
And then through that line, is that how, Heartland Global
Yes.
ended up started getting involved in the acquisition because of the payments angle?
Yeah, so Beanstalk, well, a couple pieces here. Yeah, so Beanstalk, we started to scale. We were first really integrating to point of sale to provide, at the time, which was really novel, near real-time loyalty connected to point of sale at scale. So doing offer, sort of that, the right message at the right time based on the POS transactional data in the cloud, or, ASP in a hosting sort of pre-cloud, if that makes sense, to the cloud. And then phones come into scope, and then the wallets get there. But we realized through that loyalty has a long implementation cycle in terms of design. First you got the sales cycle, then you've got to design the loyalty program, then you got to pilot the loyalty program. You have to look at things over time, offers and loyalty run over time. So you have to then, A/B test over time. So one of the things we figured out around 2013 to 14, our largest client at the time, who I won't name, had this epiphany that our real value was this sort of business to consumer CRM, that there was no business to consumer CRM in the cloud for point of sale at that time. You can name any of the ones, CRMs, that some of them have sales in their name, but they're really designed for salespeople. They're not designed to collect data at scale and then action on them with campaign engines and offers and so forth. And so we pivoted and really focused on the B2C CRM. And then that's really what got the attention of some of our competitors as we started to win business, and then also some of the card schemes, and then Heartland. Yeah.
Interesting. Very good. So thank you for that path to where you are today. So let's talk about this year, and some big news for Global was the launch of the new Genius POS platform. And this is going to be kind of the heart of our discussion today. Can you talk about the industry trends that drove the design of the Genius POS product?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one of the macro trends is really bringing these sort of, so I'm first set up by market segment definition. So, small business, let's call it under 1 to 10 locations. Maybe they do about $1 million per year per location. Then you start to get into mid-market where you get into sort of 50-ish and so forth. You got multi-location, that type of thing. And then you get into enterprise, which is really, you can think of, thousands of locations and many of the popular brands that you know. And so when I think about some trends, there's a macro trend that's been carrying through since the pandemic. I don't want to rewind all the way to the pandemic, but one of the things is taking and democratizing tools that enterprises use and bringing those down to the mid-market and particularly small business, where you can bring in tools that allow a business to run, a merchant to run and grow their business. And everything's there. It's seamless. It's in one user interface. It's in one platform, and it allows them to be effective versus historically they would have to, they have to go out and work with the VAR to bring in all these different third parties. So from the VAR's perspective, now they've got one partner they can work with who's bringing a lot of value and helping them increase margin and so forth. And then also deploying that versus they've got the headache as a VAR or even as a merchant or client trying to source from all these different providers, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And just to, double click on that, in the pandemic, one of the things that we noticed was that if we go back to sort of that March, there was a sort of the Marches when the national emergency was declared and folks had to sort of shelter in place through about May. One of the things that we noticed was that in that immediate, after the shelter in place order was given within a few weeks, all the way through May, the businesses, our customers that actually had additional products beyond just payments. So they had point of sale, they had gift, they had loyalty, they had online ordering as an example. They were more resilient during that period of time. And then they were more resilient coming out of the pandemic than customers that did not. And so if you think about, during the pandemic, when those orders went into place, large enterprises already have mobile ordering and delivery and all these kind of things worked out. And so, yeah, it impacted their revenue, but it wasn't an existential threat to put them out of business. Mm-hmm. But in the small business and mid-market, it was things like having a gift card program or having online ordering already there at the start of the pandemic. Those small businesses fared better and then were more resilient. So as we, that's a lesson that we learned by looking at that. And so coming forward, we start thinking about and looking at Genius, what are the different capabilities we can put in there so that things like bookings and reservations and having online ordering and having invoicing and pay by link and just all these things, along with inventory management and order and transactions and things of that nature, if that makes sense. So it's in one solution.
Got it, and bundle it all together.
Yep.
Yeah, so some of the trends you talked about, again, tools to the SMBs, it seems like also a lot of services being offered by the VARs, and then, this beyond POS being more resilient. Are there any other industry trends you want to mention, or do you want me to start doubling down on some of those?
There's another one, which is AI. And, one of the things, having been in software, for a while now, 3.5 decades, new cycles come along. Whether I remember when fax machines were a big deal, and then email was a big deal when email came in, and we didn't have to do things by US Post anymore, the 800 or the phone call. And then .com came in, and online storefronts and whatnot, and then the phones. And so I've been through many different cycles where everybody first looks and says, this is going to change the industry forever. It's also going to take away jobs. It's also going to change, put VARs and salespeople out of business or whatnot. And always leaned into how to use that for the betterment of the customer, the team, whatnot. So AI is an example. So AI, there's a lot of buzzwords out there about that. Not just buzz, but buzzwords and folks thinking about it. The way I think about AI is, how can it just solve simple problems? So our why. So our business has a why within Global Payments, which is we build software to help businesses around the world run and grow their business. But our team always talks about there's a secondary piece, which is, if we're helping you run and grow your business, how do we also give you back time and make things simpler? Not to take away people's jobs or so forth, but just to give you back time so you can start to think about spending more time with your family, growing the business, or employees at the business, thinking about optimizing things and doing things better. And so in AI, I think about the first simple use case is we could build reporting ad nauseum and never have enough reporting and analytics for the customer, no matter what size they are. Everybody always wants that extra dashboard, that extra ability to slice and dice. So simply having an LLM interface where you can ask questions of Genius and then get back, what's the top selling item? What's the inventory? What are my most loyal customers? Because you've got, again, loyalty and bookings and reservations and inventory all together. So the first is just simply, you've got the best reporting interface by asking natural language questions. And then you could do things where then you get to the second phase of saving time and making it more efficient, which is you ask and go through a series of insights about inventory. What if you ask, well, what would happen if I change my price? What would happen if I change the price? Well, here's what would happen. And oh, by the way, would you like to do that? And just makes it happen versus you get the analysis from the consultants or you do the analysis and then you're like, well, I can't implement it because it's going to take me too much time to go update the pricing fast enough. Then you could get into loyalty and other things. So I think about with AI, it's just simply starting with the basics and saving time and then moving from there. Not that there's some kind of silver bullet, if that makes sense.
Very much. The RSPA is in the process. We're forming an AI advisory group to guide VARs and ISVs on, like you're just talking about, there's a million different options, both internal efficiency, external revenue generating. And that's what the experts keep saying to us is, what's the pain point? Start with the problem. If AI can solve it, great. If it's something else, that's fine too. But that's where you have to start off with, right? Taking care of your merchants, helping them run more effectively, more efficiently.
That's right.
And that's what it sounds like is your take as well. Not just with AI, but like you talked about from going back to the fax machines
That's right.
to today, right? Like what is the application? What's the pain point?
That's right. And if I think about, experience of going from fax to post to email to whatever, and then, the sort of intranet to the customers to figure out their licensing models and everything without getting the salesperson engaged. I think today from a VAR, if today I had a VAR, I'd be focused on then also how to add AI from a, let's call it a sales tool in terms of allowing the prospective client to interact with that to sort of figure out what are the capabilities and what are the things so that then the VAR salesperson could add even more value and be more strategic versus just simply going through product information and trying to figure out which of the product and feature capabilities match. So I'd be focused on trying to introduce AI there from a sales tool matter, if that makes sense.
Very much, very much. So thanks for talking about it in that realm because our members keep telling us they don't want to talk about what AI could do. They want to talk about what AI is doing. And you're talking about some practical applications. Let's dovetail in that. You brought up that the tools that are available for the enterprise are coming down to the SMB space. One thing that I've said is consumers before would be like, hey, it's my small mom and pop merchant. I'm going to give them a break. But now that they have Amazon and Walmart, right, and all these, snap your fingers and it's going to show up on your doorstep, they're less, kind, I guess, and they have higher expectations for what the merchant can offer. Can you talk about the importance of VARs being able to offer tools to those SMB and mid-sized merchants so they can compete with the enterprise because the consumers are counting on them to act like the enterprise?
Yeah, I think about, if it's a VAR working with a small business, it's not just that you've got the sort of what you might think of historically as point of sale, inventory, sales tax calculator, sales tax, business logic, those type of things. But are there tools in there to help the small business acquire customers? When in running and being, with a lot of history and customer engagement loyalty programs, one of the things that was always asked by clients, direct clients, were, what do you have to acquire customers? In terms of digital advertising, acquisition tools, whether it's social reviews as an acquisition tool, as an example, online table reservations or booking reservations is an acquisition tool to acquire new customers. Order ahead with delivery is an acquisition tool. So the first thing is making sure that you're selling a solution that has acquisition tools, because that's often why folks will go into, a small business or even a mid-market business has to go into a marketplace and then slice off a piece of their margin because they're just trying to simply acquire customers. And so when you can provide acquisition tools in the solution, that helps. And then also retention tools to drive more frequency. And most folks are focused on retention tools, loyalty, gift cards, things of that nature. That's a pretty no-brainer. But the acquisition tools is a big component. There's another piece I think about too, which is today, and this is where I think, again, going back to AI a bit and where the puck's going. Today, you would go and search online, and there are plenty of tools to connect a point of sale online so that your inventory shows up in Google search just like a big enterprise or an Amazon or so forth. So there are a lot of tools around that. But where the future is going is, what if folks start to go into their LLM model, without naming names, go into an LLM model, and they start to look up, where's the local XYZ, or is this in stock, or that type of thing, after they've done some research. And then the LLM starts to provide the ability to transact right there in that sort of zero moment of truth, as Google calls it in search. And so to me, getting POS inventory data and other tools, platforms connected up to name any of the LLMs out there that folks are using, that's going to be the future, or at least future proofing, because I'm sure search and other things will evolve too.
Right, because if SEO was everything and ranking out in those search rankings, now it's, do you come up when somebody poses a question
Correct.
to some of these, chat tools. It's funny. I think you and I are right about the same age, so we've seen a lot of the same technology,
Yep.
roles. It's I remember. So, do you remember Ask Jeeves? Do you remember
Yes.
that search
Oh,
engine?
yeah, I remember Ask Jeeves.
And so Ask Jeeves wasn't just you put in words, you asked Jeeves a
Yes.
question. And I find myself doing that now. Like, that's essentially what I'm doing when I'm interacting with
Yes.
Gemini or ChatGPT or
That's
something
right.
like that. So it's really funny how, but boy, obviously what's the results that come up are way different now. And it sounds like what you're saying is merchants and VARs have to be able to adapt to that as well. They have to understand that better.
That's right. If it's interesting if someone's been around long enough. Innovation and the way that industry advances is you break things apart and put them back together in better, more useful ways. And in this case, AI is a new technology versus Ask Jeeves, but you could say that it's the concepts. It's sort of the concepts and the ideas that you break apart and put back together in better and more useful ways, and just the underlying technology changes to make it more scalable and faster and more efficient, if that makes sense.
Very much.
Yeah.
Let me ask about one more before, one more of these trends that we mentioned. It's about going beyond the POS. And so we saw that during the recession. Like you said, these VARs had been preaching for years, online ordering, curbside pickup, everything
Yep.
like that. And then, the restaurants and retailers like, we're fine, we're fine. And then once the recession hit, they
Yep.
were scrambling to do that. Can you talk about, and again, this is, driving why you created Genius. It's not just taking care of the point of sale, it's everything or most everything around it. Can you talk about the importance of that, and then VARs being able to own the entire, retail technology ecosystem, not just the point of sale with their merchants?
Yes, it's interesting because global payments. As an acquirer, obviously we think about payments, and to me, all the software that we wrap around is a value-added solution. So loyalty is a value-added solution. So is inventory. So is bookings and reservations. Those type of things. And so by bringing all that into one solution into Genius, whether it's bookings, online ordering, social reviews, acquisition tools like social reviews and smart campaigns from Google and so forth, just as you mentioned, one, you give a differentiated solution. You've got everything there. So it provides more value to the small business, and you don't have to then also take the time to cobble together all these different systems and whatnot. But it also helps with something that I saw, if I want to speak directly to VARs, I think about my experience at Software Express, where over that career I watched something called margin compression. If you're putting more value in there, you're wrapping more value around that transaction, around the payment transaction, and by putting more value in, you're also then not increasing, but keeping the margin there, keeping the margin for the value, if that makes sense, versus having significant margin compression for a VAR.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well said. Before we take a quick commercial break, I also want to get your perspective on how you think Genius is going to help VARs better compete against what we at the RSPA call margin obliterating, VC-backed, 800 number, one-size-fits-all POS providers who don't believe in the channel.
Yeah. So I think, one, going back to the last question, putting that value in there gives a differentiated solution versus you might have one of these 800 as you just described it, but it may be difficult to bring the payments in. And if it's difficult to bring the payments in, then things like simple card not present features, invoicing, pay by link, order ahead, virtual terminal, all these things that you need, then you don't have those solutions. Two, you have to bring in third parties that get sort of clunky, or also difficult to bring in. Maybe that makes it more challenging. So you've got lots of value that the VAR can deliver, and by having that value and having a good partner, then they will have good margin there, versus the competitor. The other piece, because I think about it, back to that margin compression piece. Often the margin compression got so much that I remember competing against resellers where I realized they were just looking to get more MDF funds, marketing development funds, than even the margin. That's where it kind of got to in the 90s, particularly the late 90s. And so I think now with Genius, getting scale with Genius requires all distribution go-to-market motions, whether it's partner, direct field, inside, various types of partners, international distribution, the scale of global payments. Dealers are a piece of the partner ecosystem, critically important. I learned my lessons of how Microsoft did that with the indirect model to get scale at the early days when they were not a household name outside of OS. And so I sort of take some of those lessons learned here with Genius. And it's also how to continue to deliver value.
No, and I appreciate you talk about the revenue part of it, because I've, again, been in this space for almost as long as you have. And oftentimes you talk to folks who have a new product and they talk about the product and how great it is. And the VAR's like, that's nice. Can I make money with it? And will it open new doors for me, right? Because if it doesn't also do those two things, it might be neat, but it's not going to help them get the number that they need.
Yeah, it's interesting. My experience at Software Express in terms of being a salesperson, then growing a sales team, an inside sales team, and then leading the inside sales team there by by 2000, 97 through 2000. One of the things I learned is that often you could have the best product and widget, but if you don't have the right sort of go-to-market motion or the right to your point, margin profile and whatnot, it doesn't get the salespeople's interest. Therefore, nobody ever hears about it.
Yep.
And so certainly in a company with this scale and all the different distribution channels, we think about that as we're building bundles and products and whatnot, and thinking about, sometimes a product idea, if it can't actually make a return, is it worth doing the product? And typically, if I think it through the customer lens on that means we're not delivering enough value to the customer. I know we're focused here on the VARs and sales, but the same is true of the customer. The customer's not going to buy it if there's not enough value in it, if that makes sense.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. So let's pause here to let our listeners and viewers know about the Retail Solution Providers Association. RSPA is North America's largest community of retail technology VARs, software providers, vendors, and distributors. To accelerate your success through an RSPA membership, email membership@gorspa.org. Also, thanks to these companies who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our platinum sponsor is Blue Star. Our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, ScanSource, and Heartland, aka Global Payments, aka Genius. And also want to make sure everybody knows registration is now open for Inspire 2026, the Retail IT Channel's premier leadership conference. RSPA Inspire is set for February 1st through 4th on the beautiful island of Kauai, Hawaii. For more information, visit gorspa.org/inspire so you can experience networking nirvana. So we've only got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk a bit, Gilbert, about your leadership journey and what you learned along the way. So first, can you describe your leadership style? Are there a few overarching words or phrases that represent what you're striving for as a leader?
Building empowering teams, collaborative, hearing lots of voices, particularly alternative points of view, but then taking action and making a decision based on those voices. I learned at Software Express, being an individual contributor, there was a point where I had an epiphany about, delegating, building teams and so forth versus trying to do it yourself. Because it's a simple math game. If you do something at one and you continue to do it there, it's hard to scale that. But if you get a bunch of folks at point, at 0.8, at 0.5 or whatever, and get scale, just because, they're getting trained, they're learning something new, you actually end up better off. And so that was an important lesson at Software Express carrying through. But it's really building these teams and empowering them, taking opportunities to put them forward. You don't want to just always take the chance to go speak or to go lead something or whatever. You want to build and empower team members to do that, if that makes sense. That's how you get true scale.
Right, because you got to have a leave behind, right? It can't just be all leaning on you. So go ahead.
That's right. And then the other one is, my team would, I'm sure if they were here, they would smile at this one. Action beats inaction. Do not sit around and admire a problem. Action always beats inaction. So I move fast, listen to voices, particularly again, looking for alternative points of view, but then taking decisive action and moving on.
I love it. Action always beats inaction. Can
Yes.
you double down a little bit on what you said about collaborative? So I'm a big fan of that as well. When people ask about my leadership style, I say try to think that I'm not sitting at the head of the table, but it's part of a round table and everybody's contributing to the pool of knowledge. What are some things that you do to enhance collaboration among your team?
Yes, it's interesting. So one is sort of the disciplined cadences in terms of having regular check-ins and calls where you've got lots of voices around the table and lots of diverse opinions and so forth. And the team knows that there's sort of a healthy friction in debating ideas, particularly the alternative points of view, and they see that often encourage that debate, that healthy friction. But then they also see that at some point we're going to cut that off and make a decision and move on. So.
Got it. Yeah. So don't be afraid of any disagreement.
Yeah, it's interesting. There, I went to Guilford College, which is a Quaker school. I'm not a Quaker, but went there, and then I served on the board of trustees for a long time. And it runs by consensus. And in the consensus decision-making model, collaboration and hearing all points of view to get to consensus. It's an interesting operating model. And so I would say it's a little bit of a blend of that sort of consensus in terms of getting all those viewpoints out there, but with a little bit more on the sort of then moving forward with action because there's a single decision maker versus you're getting to, drive to consensus. But I find that to be a healthy process.
Very nice. If I could connect two worlds together, I'm originally from Erie, Pennsylvania. Bradford is outside of Erie. Jesse
Yep.
DeLoof, who is a great coach at Pitt Bradford, just started as the head men's basketball coach at Guilford there. So love it. I am following Guilford, and Quaker institutions are always very, very interesting to me as well in terms of their approach to things. So, so you talked about your path to get from where you are today. Can you talk about some of the leaders that you've looked up to as mentors and helped you shape your leadership approach? And what are the things they did or that they said that has had a lasting impact on you?
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of mentors. It's hard to think about something that sticks out, but I will say that there's if you were on my team, you would get a book called Strategic Intuition. All my direct reports and many of their reports get this book called Strategic Intuition. It's by I think Columbia University Press. William, I think it's Dugan. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. The Strategic Intuition is very much in this sort of this model of you read a lot. So in this case, like listen to podcasts, read a lot, stay up with things. You build the right team, you get them trained, and then you can have this sort of creative spark and act versus you're creating some monolithic strategic plan, if that makes sense. So Strategic Intuition is something I look at, and there's a lot of folks who are highlighted in that book, whether it's General Patton or Steve Jobs or others, but it talks about this sort of notion of there's sort of this two models. You can create this sort of monolithic plan. You can go do a bunch of brainstorming sessions, et cetera, or you can get a bunch of smart people together who are very well versed and up to speed on things, got the right resources, the right team, and then you plant seeds and ideas with them, and then let the sort of creative spark, the moment when they're in the shower, they're going to bed and about to doze off, or they're, running a long distance, and you've planted that seed, and then have the meeting, and the idea comes to them before the meeting. So you have a very productive meeting versus the other way around of doing brainstorming, cold and giving out the topics in the meeting, and it's hard to progress. But Strategic Intuition really captures a lot of the leadership style. If I want to get into a specific person without naming names on this one, I'll use a fictional character, Jim.
Okay.
So you probably watched Star Trek when it was live on TV back in the day with Gunsmoke, like I did.
All right.
So I think about like whether it's Captain Kirk or name any of the future ones, like Captain Picard or any of them, and I think about there's a lot of lessons there in terms of getting the officers together, getting diverse points of view. But you have to make a decision. It's also important to understand how things work on the starship as the captain versus, you're sort of disconnected from it. There's a lot of lessons growing up on Star Trek where, my team will hear me quote things all the time, if that makes sense.
Very good. And the Spock, right? And
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything with that. So
yeah, exactly.
very nice. And as you were talking, I quickly looked it up. Strategic Intuition, The Creative Spark in Human Achievement, a 2007 book by William Dugan, and it is Columbia University Press. So
Yeah.
very good memory. I'm going to get that one. And it kind of reminds me of back when I was with a publishing company going through the Great Recession. I remember our controller sent an email, and he basically said, this is before our steering committee meeting that we had. He said, we need to make a decision now before a path is determined for us, right? If you get to the point of no return, you have no choice whatsoever. That kind of sounds like what you're talking about. You get everybody thinking about the strategic,
That's
and
right.
it's not just, hey, we're following A through Z. It's making all the adaptations along the way, if I'm
That's
understanding
right.
correctly.
It's very much about being adaptive, and as we've discussed over our careers, there's a lot of change, and so if you're adaptive, you can get through it. There's a saying I always use with the team, which is, we actually want to create our future and make a decision to create our future versus being the result of somebody else's decision.
Yes, very well said.
Yeah.
Hey, a couple more questions for you. One is, can you share with us maybe a mistake that you made as a leader and what you learned from it? Could be recent, could be a long time ago, could be a colossal disaster, or it could be just fell short of your standards. You willing to share that with our audience?
Yeah, I'll give one, and this kind of ties into the action beats inaction. So, so action beats inaction. One of the things I learned sort of later in life is that if it's an existential decision, then you do need to slow down and get a lot of voices involved. So that, because it's existential in nature, it could be life-threatening, it could put you out of business, that type of thing. So you slow down. But going back to the action beats inaction. So in 2016, 2017, after the acquisition, a lot of businesses got rolled under me to put together and lead sort of a customer engagement and gift business within Global Payments. And so pretty quickly, I was making a lot of decisions in the first 30 days, very quickly. And so one of those decisions I made was to take, at the time, something called a sales enablement team, product sales specialists, and reorg and move them around. And I didn't know what product sales specialists were and product sales enablement. It was kind of, when you're used to direct sales and you're used to working through partners like VARs and so forth, to have a team that isn't calling customers directly. It's kind of, what is that? But then pretty quickly figured out in a company this size what the importance of being able to train sales folks to actually sell was so critically important. And I realized that I'd made a decision to reorg and move them into the wrong place. So one of the things that, in terms of, again, then owning up to that and demonstrating for your teams that you need to move fast, but sometimes you're going to make a mistake. I then had a call that involved the entire team, their new supervisor, their prior supervisor, and all of my direct reports, and explain, hey, we've been making a lot of decisions. I've been making decisions. We've been moving fast. This was the wrong decision. It's no fault of the prior supervisor, the new supervisor. This was my decision. We're going to reverse it. And here's why we're reversing it. I want folks to understand we're reversing it because I made a poor decision. I now understand the purpose of the team. They need to be aligned without getting to the weeds over here. But no one, in the sort of the supervisors and senior leadership team should feel that they did anything wrongly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you don't want to be passive in these things. Things didn't go as planned, or because of the circumstances, right?
Yeah.
My basketball coach said, point the thumb, not the finger. That's what it sounds like you were. That was kind of the leadership lesson for you. Take full responsibility for it.
That's right. And so there's lots of other examples of mistakes or making an investment or that type of thing. And by doing that, then the teams see that they have an opportunity where they can go off and innovate, and they can also fail and come back. One of the things I will say, communication is critically important. And I do have sort of another, saying that I use with the team, which is good news travels fast, bad news does not. So make sure bad news gets up, immediately. And so when the teams are out and they're innovating, maybe they are re-architecting because the hosting costs on some new platform aren't performing well, and they're going to go off and do a test. Pretty quickly, they may go off and they may do some innovation and it fails, and maybe it fails with an expense tied to it, but they quickly communicate that because they know bad news should travel fast. Yeah. They know they're allowed to do that. They've seen me make decisions and then own up to it. And then we just learn a lesson and move on. So.
I like it. My related saying to that is bad news never ages well. So if
That's
there's
it.
bad news, you better get to it or else it's going to be like rotten cheese
That's right.
very quickly. So,
That's
hey,
right.
so last question for you. We've only got about 3 minutes left. So what would be your final leadership advice for our audience? Let's say you have a quick ride share with a small business leader and they say, hey, Gilbert, can you give me some advice? What would be your leadership advice to them?
Well, the first one is if you have an idea, say it. So few, so many folks have ideas and they never verbalize it, so it never gets out into reality, and therefore they never build a business or create a product or do something. Then the next thing is make sure you surround yourself with folks in a team so you can actually execute on the idea. Because then, so few ideas actually get verbalized, and then of those, very few actually can be executed upon, if that makes sense. And then the other one is at that point, it would be action beats inaction. Don't sit around and admire problems and have paralysis by analysis. You got an idea, state it, have a team that can execute it, and then start moving. Even if you have some failure, you can learn from it and iterate. Otherwise, you're going to have an idea. The worst case is you have an idea, and then you have analysis by paralysis inside your head, and you never actually execute, and you never build teams, and you never lead groups and whatnot. So,
Yeah.
but in terms of just pure leadership, if they already have a group and have a team, and they've at least gotten through that, it would be making sure that you focus on talent and your team. If all the things I have going on, the top priority is always talent development and making sure that I'm investing in the team to actually
Yeah.
execute on what we have at hand.
Yeah, the right team and getting better. And it seems like you're anti-navel gazing, like just examining and sitting still. And you're a
Right.
big fan of try, test, measure,
Yes.
adapt, right? You've
Yep.
got to do all these things because just studying or thinking about it, there has to be some level of that. But like you said, you've got to have some action so you can test it against the market and
That's right.
adapt to it, if I'm understanding.
That's right, because the market's moving on. If you're sitting there doing analysis and thinking about it, others are moving, even if you can't see them. Yeah.
Very nice. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. Before we go, big thanks again to Gilbert Bailey for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, please visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.